The winter of 1285. A Hungarian guard surveys the recently erected stone fortifications lining the eastern frontier. His breath, forming small clouds in the frigid air, drifts as he gazes into the gloom beyond the Carpathian mountains. Suddenly, a sound reaches his ears, a sound that sends a shiver down the spine of anyone who lived through the events of 44 years prior. The rhythmic thunder of hooves, thousands upon thousands of hooves. Above this terrifying cadence echoes a blood-curdling battle cry. Hurrah! 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 The Mongols have returned. The guard's hand trembles as he reaches for the alarm bell. Around him, other sentinels freeze, recognizing that unmistakable sound. Some are old enough to recall 1241, when they were children hiding in forests and caves as their world burned. They remember the tales told by their surviving parents, the mass graves, the deserted villages, the ensuing years of famine.
And now, decades later, standing on walls that didn't exist in their youth, they are hearing those same battle cries reverberate through the mountains. You might assume you already know the ending to this story. We've all encountered narratives of Mongol conquests, the relentless hordes of Genghis Khan sweeping across Asia like a human-shaped natural disaster. We're familiar with the smoldering ruins of Baghdad, where the Tigris River reportedly turned black from the ink of annihilated libraries and red from the blood of scholars. We know of the fall of Kiev, of Russian princes crushed beneath celebratory platforms, and the widespread terror that gripped Europe as these warriors from the east appeared on the horizon, like a biblical plague. If you possess any knowledge of Hungarian history, you are likely aware that in 1241, the Mongols didn't just conquer Hungary, they decimated it. They slaughtered roughly a quarter of the population, between 250,000 and 500,000 people. They reduced Central Europe's most formidable kingdom to smoldering rubble and scattered bones. Contemporary chroniclers detailed how wolves and wild animals repopulated villages, so complete was the human eradication. So, when the guards heard the Mongol war cries in the winter of 1285, when they again witnessed the banners of the Golden Horde cresting the mountain passes, they had valid reason to believe they were witnessing the end of days for the second time in their lives. Their fathers had failed to stop the Mongols. Entire armies were swept away like dust before a hurricane. What chance did they have? But here's the crucial point. The very reason this narrative deserves retelling, study, and remembrance. They were mistaken. What unfolded in 1285 was not a repeat of 1241. It wasn't even close. In fact, it was almost the complete opposite, because in the 44 years between those two invasions, Hungary had transformed into something the Mongols had never encountered before, something they didn't comprehend, something they couldn't defeat. The account of this transformation stands as one of the most remarkable tales of resilience, strategic genius, and sheer stubborn determination in medieval history. It's a story about learning lessons from catastrophic failure, about strategic patience and long-term planning in an era when most rulers thought in months and years, not decades. It's about the courage to completely rethink an entire society in response to an existential threat. And it's about the moment when the unstoppable force of Mongol conquest finally met an immovable object, explicitly designed to halt them. However, to grasp how Hungary triumphed, we must first understand the utter devastation of their initial defeat. We need to go back to April 11th, 1241, to a place called Mohi, to witness what one chronicler later described as the day God turned his face away from Christendom. King Bela IV of Hungary was a capable man. Let me clarify this immediately, because it's easy in hindsight to attribute incompetence or cowardice. He was neither incompetent nor a coward. By most medieval standards, he was a rather effective ruler, who consolidated royal power and maintained one of the strongest kingdoms in Central Europe. When in 1237 he received news that a mysterious army of horsemen from the east was laying waste to everything in its path, he took it seriously, but only to a degree. He listened to the warning. He nodded in the right places. He even instituted some preliminary defensive measures. But I don't believe he truly grasped the magnitude of what was coming. The warning came from a Dominican friar named Julian, who brought a letter from Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's own grandson. In it, Batu demanded that Bela unconditionally surrender his entire kingdom to the Tatar forces or face annihilation. Bela responded as any medieval king would to such an outrageous ultimatum from an unknown power thousands of miles away. He ignored it. This was, in essence, understandable. Imagine a messenger suddenly appearing, claiming to represent an unknown empire and demanding complete surrender. You'd probably laugh him off, too. Yet, this wasn't the end. Two more warnings followed. First, in 1239, the Cumans, a nomadic group fleeing for their lives, arrived with tales of horrors almost too unbelievable to grasp. They spoke of cities razed in days, populations massacred down to the last child, and an army moving with a swiftness previously unseen in Europe. I granted them asylum, settling them across the steppes along the Tisza River, a decision that proved both prescient and fraught with issues. The second warning materialized in early 1241 from Poland, which was already suffering an invasion by a separate Mongol detachment. By then, adequate preparation was impossible. You see, I faced a dilemma that might seem outlandish to modern military strategists, but was a harsh reality in medieval Europe. For generations, Hungarian monarchs maintained an absolute monopoly on castle construction. Only the king could authorize stone fortifications, and these were primarily built along the western border, facing the Holy Roman Empire. Why? Because powerful, independent castles nurtured powerful, independent nobles, and powerful, independent nobles posed potential challenges to royal authority. This policy was remarkably effective in centralizing royal power. However, it was also a policy poised to doom hundreds of thousands.
Consequently, when the Mongols invaded Hungary in early 1241, there were virtually no fortifications to halt their advance or protect the populace. The Mongol invasion of Hungary wasn't conducted by a single, monolithic army, but by 5 distinct forces, each a testament to coordinated strategy. The main contingent, potentially numbering 50,000 to 60,000 men, under the command of Batu Khan and the legendary general Subutai, entered through the Verik Pass in the northeast. The sheer speed of the Mongol offensive was terrifying. Contemporary European observers described it as a lightning strike, a force of nature rather than a human military. They moved faster than messengers could deliver warnings, faster than defending armies could mobilize. The Mongols traveled light. Each warrior possessing multiple horses allowed them to alternate mounts and maintain a pace that would have killed European war horses in days. I personally directed the construction of dense natural barriers along Hungary's eastern frontier, months of labor and considerable expense. Yet, Mongol specialized units cleared these paths in just 3 days. 3 days to eliminate obstacles that took months to create. Hungarian forces, scattered across the nation, attempted to intercept them. Every effort failed, often spectacularly. An army led by Archbishop Ugrin Chak of Kalocha tried to engage a Mongol detachment. The Mongols feigned retreat. The archbishop, believing he had secured a great victory, ordered his heavily armored cavalry to pursue. The Mongols led them directly into a marsh. The heavy European horses became mired in the mud, hopelessly stuck. Mongol horse archers encircled the stranded Hungarian troops and decimated them from a safe distance. The archbishop himself barely escaped. By the time I managed to assemble my main army, likely somewhere between 80,000 and 100,000 men, my kingdom was already bleeding from 1,000 wounds. On April 10, 1241, the two primary forces finally clashed on the Sajo River, near the small town of Mohi. This time, the Christians held a numerical advantage. The Hungarians also had a superior position, occupying the western bank of the river, while the Mongols were on the eastern bank. They controlled the only significant bridge in the area. The Hungarians established their camp on the western bank. That night, when a small Mongol force attempted to cross the bridge, Hungarian crossbowmen repelled them with heavy losses. The camp erupted in cheers. They had won. The dreaded Mongols had just been routed by Hungarian soldiers. Wine flowed freely. Men celebrated. If you've studied military history at all, you can likely guess what happened next. Repelling the attack on the bridge was not a Mongol defeat. It was a ruse. It was theater, a meticulously planned deception designed to instill a false sense of security in the Hungarians, to make them drop their guard. While the Hungarians reveled in their perceived victory, Subutai calmly executed a plan he had likely conceived days earlier. At dawn on April 11th, Batu Khan initiated another assault across the bridge. This time, the attack was augmented by something new. The Mongols brought up catapults and began launching projectiles at the Hungarian positions. But these weren't merely stones. Contemporary reports characterized them as devices that produced a roaring sound and fire, explosive or incendiary materials of some kind, which instilled noise, smoke, and an utter sense of dread in the defenders. However, this frontal assault was merely a diversion. The actual threat lay elsewhere. While the Hungarians focused all their attention on the bridge, Subutai discovered a ford several miles upstream. During the night, as the Hungarians slept after their celebration, Subutai's forces silently took up their positions. Now, with Batu attacking from the front, Subutai's cavalry executed a flanking maneuver to assault the Hungarian camp from the rear. The Hungarians, realizing their inevitable encirclement, responded exactly as the Mongols anticipated. They fled the camp in a desperate bid to break through the ring before it fully closed. And at that precise moment, the traps sprang shut. It was here that the Hungarians' own blunders turned against them. The Hungarian encampment was poorly organized. Tents were clustered together, leaving no room for movement. Wagons were arranged around the perimeter of the camp, which seemed like a sound strategy until it transformed into a snare, trapping thousands of soldiers in a confined space without the ability to fight effectively or any means of retreat. When the Mongol forces began their systematic extermination, there was no escaping. Mongol archers, the finest in the world, unleashed volley after volley into the mass of people. When the Hungarians finally managed to break out of the camp and attempted to flee westward, the Mongols had shrewdly left a gap in their encirclement. To the desperate Hungarians, this seemed like a miracle. They streamed into this breach in a disorganized horde. Thousands abandoned their formations and weapons. This was not an act of mercy. It was tactical brilliance founded on psychological calculation, which Sun Tzu had articulated centuries earlier. Construct a golden bridge for the enemy's retreat. The Mongols understood that cornered individuals fight with fierce courage, but those offered an escape route will seize it, and those fleeing are easily slain. As the Hungarian army devolved into a panicked rout, Mongol light cavalry pursued them for many miles. Methodically, systematically, they caught up with the fleeing soldiers, shot them with arrows, and moved to the next target. It was a slaughter conducted with industrial efficiency. By the evening of April 11th, between 60,000 and 70,000 Hungarian soldiers had perished. In a single day of battle, Hungary lost more troops than many medieval kingdoms could field in their entirety. Archbishop Ugrin Sack died in the massacre. Duke Koloman of Slavonia, the king's brother, sustained a mortal wound. King Bela IV himself barely escaped, racing into Austria, with Mongol pursuit detachments chasing him through his own kingdom like a wounded animal. And the Mongols had only just commenced their true campaign. What followed the Hungarians would simply recall as the devastation. The Mongol army, now free from any significant military opposition, spread across Hungary like a plague. They burned Pest, a major city on the eastern bank of the Danube. They swept across the great Hungarian plain, destroying everything with methodical precision. This was not merely military destruction. The Mongols obliterated civilian infrastructure with the same thoroughness as military targets. Villages were burned, farms ruined, monasteries plundered, mills demolished, and bridges annihilated. They killed livestock, ruined crops, and destroyed wells. The death toll was staggering. Modern historians estimate that approximately a quarter of Hungary's population perished during and immediately after the Mongol invasion, ranging from 250,000 to 500,000 people. Some regions were almost completely depopulated. The Great Hungarian Plain resembled a desert. Contemporary chroniclers described wolves and wild animals returning to the villages because simply no people remained. But here's an interesting detail, one that would prove crucial 44 years later. Not every fortification fell. In fact, the few stone castles Hungary possessed withstood every Mongol assault. When the Mongols attacked Esztergom, the capital and largest city in Hungary, they brought 30 siege engines, 30 catapults and trebuchets, artillery that had reduced the mighty cities of China and Persia to ruins. They bombarded the stone walls with everything in their arsenal. The walls endured, thick and well built enough to withstand the impacts without significant damage. When the bombardment failed, the Mongols launched an assault. Batu Khan himself, Genghis Khan's grandson, personally led a desperate charge against the walls. He lost 30 of his personal bodyguards in this attempt. These were elite warriors, bagateurs, the best of the best. Crossbowmen shot them down from the battlements. The Mongols, masters of siege warfare who had breached fortresses across Asia, could not capture a single well-constructed stone castle in Hungary. Another fortress that held out was the Croatian castle of Klis. The Mongols brought their siege engines and hurled stones at the walls, but the stones merely bounced off. After several fruitless assaults, the Mongols retreated and moved on. These small triumphs were mere flickers of light in an otherwise oppressive darkness, but they offered a glimmer of hope that some recognized. A crucial lesson was absorbed. Well-built and adequately protected stone walls could conclusively halt the Mongols. In March 1242, the Mongols departed Hungary as abruptly as they had arrived. Word reached Batu Khan of the great Khan Ogeday's death in Mongolia. Mongol succession law mandated that all princes of the blood return to the Kurultai, an assembly tasked with electing a new Khan. Batu withdrew his forces eastward, leaving behind a kingdom so ravaged that its complete recovery would span generations. King Bela IV returned from his sanctuary on the Adriatic coast to find his domain utterly devastated.
Contemporaries recounted his unconcealed weeping at the sight of his ruined capital. The chronicler, Master Roger, authored a work titled Carmen Miserabile, or Song of Lament, describing horrors that would appall a modern reader. Bela IV might have succumbed to despair. He could have focused solely on immediate restoration. Many monarchs would have done precisely that, but Bela IV would prove himself to be among Hungary's most exceptional rulers. As he surveyed the smoldering ruins of his kingdom, his thoughts went beyond mere reconstruction. He considered the future, contemplating the next invasion, for he knew with absolute certainty that the Mongols would return. And when they did, Hungary would be ready, not merely to resist, but to triumph. Before we continue the narrative of Bela IV's transformation of Hungary, if you appreciate this in-depth exploration of medieval history and military strategy, please click the like button.
It genuinely helps the algorithm present this content to more history enthusiasts. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button. Imagine yourself as Bela IV in the summer of 1242. You stand where your capital once was. Wooden fortifications have turned to ash and charcoal. Homes lie in ruins. Bodies are still being collected from the streets. Your treasury is empty. Your nobles have scattered. You possess virtually no army, no funds. Your population is traumatized, questioning if God himself has forsaken them. Most kings in history facing such a predicament would spend the remainder of their reign attempting to revert to the pre-catastrophe state. Bela IV opted to construct something unprecedented. He resolved to entirely reshape Hungarian society, overturn centuries-old traditions, and stake everything on a gamble that most of his contemporaries would likely have deemed insane.
The lesson from Esztergom and Eklus was glaringly obvious once grasped. Stone walls stopped the Mongols, not wooden palisades, not earthen ramparts, not faith or bravery, nor cavalry charges. It was stone. Yet, Hungary possessed an extreme scarcity of stone castles, perhaps a dozen significant ones throughout the entire kingdom. Constructing new ones was incredibly costly. Bela IV undertook something that must have appeared mad to his contemporaries. He abolished centuries-old Hungarian traditions. Through a series of decrees, beginning in 1242 and extending throughout his reign, he actively encouraged his nobles to build stone castles. He didn't just permit it, he incentivized it. He offered stimuli, tax breaks, and political privileges to anyone who erected proper defensive fortifications. Consider the political implications of this. For generations,
Hungarian kings had jealously guarded their monopoly on military power. They understood that strong castles meant powerful nobles, and powerful nobles posed a threat to royal authority. Bela IV deliberately fostered potential rivals to his own power, because he grasped a more fundamental truth. A king ruling over ashes ruled nothing. It was better to share power with strong nobles who could defend the kingdom than to retain absolute authority over a graveyard. Better to risk future civil conflict than to guarantee present extinction. The transformation was astonishing in its scope and speed. In the first decade following the invasion, 44 new stone castles appeared across Hungary. By the end of Bela IV's reign in 1270, this number had almost tripled, reaching approximately 100 castles. For comparison, this was more castles built in a single generation than many European kingdoms constructed over centuries. And these weren't merely fortifications, they were advanced defensive structures, incorporating every lesson learned from the Mongol invasion. They were built on hilltops, coastal cliffs, or any terrain offering natural advantages. They featured thick walls, often 8 to 10 feet in width, designed to withstand bombardment. These fortifications featured multiple layers of defense and ample provisions for prolonged sieges. Take, for instance, Visegrád, erected between 1246 and 1259, atop a commanding hill overlooking the Danube bend. Funding for its construction came from the dowry of King Bela IV's devoted spouse, Queen Maria Lascarina. The king literally utilized his wife's dowry to build this fortress, indicating the gravity with which he perceived the threat. The stronghold effectively barred river passage through the mountainous terrain, making any progress for armies along the Danube impossible without first confronting Visegrád or accounting for the Buda fortress. Before 1241, Esztergom served as Hungary's capital. Following the invasion, Bela IV relocated the seat of power to Buda, primarily due to its superior defensive position on Castle Hill overlooking the Danube. The new capital wasn't simply rebuilt, it was re-envisioned as a fortress city, designed to serve as a final bastion should the Mongols return. However, Bela IV's efforts extended beyond castles. He fundamentally reformed the Hungarian military structure. The light cavalry, which formed the backbone of Hungarian forces until 1241, proved ineffective against the Mongols, who excelled at their own combat methods. Bela IV reallocated resources towards heavy cavalry, armored knights capable of holding ground and engaging in close combat. He recruited crossbowmen from Venice and other Italian city-states, and brought in hospitaller knights and other military orders. These were not merely soldiers, but experienced military professionals. The social restructuring was equally profound. Vast areas of Hungary lay depopulated after the Mongol invasion. Deceased peasants paid no taxes, and fallow land produced nothing. Bela IV initiated an aggressive campaign to repopulate his kingdom, offering incentives to settlers from Germany, Poland, Italy, and other European nations. Thousands arrived, bringing with them new agricultural techniques, crafts, and skills. They established towns and villages in previously desolate areas. Within a single generation, many of the most heavily affected regions recovered their population numbers and productivity. Bela IV actively championed mining and metallurgy, understanding that economic strength underpinned military power. He encouraged the development of fortified towns, granting urban privileges to settlements that agreed to maintain walls and militia forces. In essence, he created a layered defense, a network of mutually supportive strongholds designed to complicate life for any invader. Throughout this transformative period, for decades, border incursions from the east served as a constant reminder that these measures were not merely theoretical. The Mongols had not forgotten Hungary. Small raiding parties crossed the borders, probing defenses and testing new fortifications. They observed, learned, and waited. Bela IV's reform program came with its own set of challenges. By allowing nobles to construct castles and maintain private armies, he laid the groundwork for future civil strife. These fortified magnates grew increasingly autonomous, more inclined to challenge royal authority. The final years of Bela IV's reign were marked by escalating tensions between the crown and the magnates. Yet, Bela IV understood the implications of his actions. He made a calculated compromise. He sacrificed the absolute centralized authority of the Hungarian crown for something more critical in the immediate term: survival. He was building a kingdom that could withstand another Mongol onslaught, even if it meant creating power structures that might one day threaten his own descendants. When Bela IV passed away in 1270, after a 35-year reign, he left behind a kingdom completely transformed. Chroniclers would dub him the second founder of Hungary, placing him alongside King Stephen I, who originally established the Hungarian state in the year 1000. This was a well-deserved title. In many ways, what Bela IV accomplished in the decade following 1241 was more remarkable than the kingdom's initial founding. His son, Stephen V, reigned for only 2 years, dying in 1272. The throne then passed to his grandson, Ladislaus IV. Ladislaus IV was only 10 years old when he became king. His mother was Cuman, one of those nomadic refugees who had fled the Mongols decades earlier and settled in Hungary. As Ladislaus IV matured, he increasingly identified with his Cuman heritage rather than the Hungarian Christian court culture. He dressed like them, lived among them, and even had Cuman mistresses, neglecting his Christian wife. The Hungarian nobility and ecclesiastical hierarchy were appalled, with the Archbishop of Esztergom declaring something akin to a crusade against his own king. The kingdom that Bela IV had so meticulously rebuilt began to fray at the seams due to cultural and religious conflicts. By the 1280s, Hungary was in a state of barely controlled chaos. Ladislaus IV was at odds with the church. Nobles engaged in internecine strife for territory and privileges, utilizing the castles Bela IV had encouraged them to build as strongholds for private skirmishes. In 1282, the Cumans themselves revolted. Ladislaus IV quelled the rebellion at Lake Horde, demonstrating his effectiveness as a military leader when necessary. However, his relationships with both the church and the nobility remained severely strained. To outside observers, Hungary appeared weak, fragmented, and on the precipice of collapse. It seemed like the archetypal target the Mongols typically conquered as they built their empire. It was then that the Mongols decided the time was ripe for a second incursion. The Mongol Empire of 1285 was no longer the unified, indomitable colossus fashioned by Genghis Khan. After the Great Khan's demise and the ensuing internal conflicts, the empire had splintered into 4 major uluses. The Golden Horde, which controlled the western steppes and Rus, effectively operated autonomously under its own leadership. In 1285, the true power within the Golden Horde rested not with the official Khan, but with a man named Nagai. Nagai was as formidable and ambitious as his more prominent predecessors. For decades, he had consolidated his influence through military successes and political machinations. He campaigned from the Balkans to the Caucasus, vanquished Byzantine armies, and established himself as a significant player in Eastern European politics. His ambitions were vast. He observed a fractured, internally divided Hungary and recognized an opening. He saw an opportunity to conclude the conquest initiated by Batu Khan, to sweep through Central Europe, and to solidify his status as a conqueror worthy of Genghis himself. The immediate pretext proved almost absurdly convenient. After Ladislaus IV suppressed the Cuman uprising in 1282, many Cuman warriors opted to flee eastward rather than submit to forced Christianization. They crossed into Golden Horde territory, where they found service with Nagai. These refugees disclosed to Nagai all of Hungary's internal weaknesses. A young king scorned by his own magnates and excommunicated by his own church. They painted a picture of a nation ripe for conquest. Nagai made his resolution. He would finish what Batu Khan had started 44 years prior. In late 1285, as an uncommonly harsh winter engulfed Eastern Europe, 2 massive Mongol armies invaded Hungarian territory. The northern contingent, under Prince Talabuga, traversed the Carpathian passes, largely following the same route as Batu. The southern contingent, personally commanded by Nagai, moved through Transylvania. The Mongol plan exhibited elegant simplicity. The 2 armies were to devastate the countryside, lure out the Hungarian forces, defeat them through superior mobility, then converge at Pest,
and crush any remaining resistance. They anticipated this campaign would unfold more or less like the 1241 invasion, perhaps even more swiftly. What Nogai and Talabuga did not fully grasp was that they were invading not the Hungary of 1241. They were invading something fundamentally new, something specifically designed and constructed to annihilate Mongols. The Hungarian response immediately confounded the Mongol commanders. King Ladislaus IV did indeed assemble a royal army, but it did not concentrate in a single location awaiting a decisive battle. Instead, Hungarian forces remained dispersed. Local magnates mobilized their own armies and garrisons within their castles. Rather than seeking grand confrontations, as their predecessors had, the Hungarians seemed content to allow the Mongols to come to them. Talabuga's northern army was the first to discover what this implied in practice. As they advanced deeper into Hungary, they found every significant town defended by stone fortifications. Every strategically vital location boasted a castle. The fortress at Rika, situated on a hill in northeastern Hungary, refused to yield. The Mongols brought up their siege engines. They hurled stones at Rika's walls. The walls held firm, built by individuals who understood siege warfare and designed specifically to withstand bombardment. While the Mongols were engaged in fruitless sieges, Hungarian forces constantly harassed them. Local commanders such as Roland Borsa, Amadei Arba, George Baxier, and Peter Izrosha led mobile units that attacked Mongol foraging parties, ambushed isolated detachments, severed supply lines, and then retreated to their fortified bases before the Mongols could retaliate. This was guerrilla warfare conducted by forces with secure sanctuaries. Particularly effective were the Zekelis, fierce Hungarian allied warriors inhabiting the Carpathian borderlands. They possessed intimate knowledge of the terrain, every valley and pass, every forest path and river ford. They leveraged the mountains with the skill of a seasoned fighter, exploiting terrain in battle, transforming natural features into a weapon against the invaders. The strongholds of Transylvanian Traci proved to be a persistent annoyance for Talabuga. Defended by Zekler warriors, it withstood numerous assaults. The Mongols attacked, losing men to arrows and rock slides, made no progress, and were compelled to retreat. Each assault was a failure. Every setback depleted morale and supplies. Meanwhile, an unusually harsh winter set in, bringing snow, ice, and bitter cold. The Mongols had intentionally invaded during winter, expecting frozen rivers and solid ground to facilitate their movement. However, they failed to account for what winter would entail during military operations involving sieges of well-fortified positions. Their greatest strength lay in mobility. Their entire military system was built on rapid cavalry, capable of covering vast distances and concentrating overwhelming force against isolated targets. But Hungary in winter, dotted with fortifications that could not be quickly bypassed or captured, completely nullified this advantage. The Mongols found themselves drawn into siege operations, where they had no prospect of victory, squandering provisions and achieving nothing. Their mobility, their crucial advantage, became useless when there was no room for maneuver. Each objective required a prolonged siege, and that winter's weather was particularly severe. Deep snow hindered the movement even of their resilient steppe ponies. The frozen ground meant horses couldn't graze easily, demanding they carry more fodder or forage from the countryside, which had been meticulously ravaged. Nogai's southern army in Transylvania encountered similar difficulties. They managed to seize only one significant fortification, the Castle of Banmakode. And this success came at a steep price. Everywhere else, stone walls and resolute defenders halted their advance. Local forces under the command of Voivode Roland Borsa conducted a masterful defensive campaign, using the mountainous terrain to funnel Mongol movements into kill zones and orchestrate devastating ambushes. Borsa had studied records of the 1241 invasion. He understood how the Mongols fought, and thus simply refused to engage them on their terms. He harassed them, set ambushes, retreated, and repeated the cycle. The Hungarian militias deserve special mention. These were not professional soldiers, but armed peasants, townspeople, and minor nobles, organized and trained specifically for local defense. They knew their regions intimately and fought with the desperation of people protecting their homes and families.
Crucially, they had fortified positions to fall back to under pressure. This defensive system was incredibly challenging to defeat, as it lacked a single point of failure. By early 1286, likely around February, Talabuga and Nagai managed to unite their forces near Pest. If they had succeeded in taking the city, it might have saved the campaign. But Pest was now reinforced with stone walls and protected by troops who understood precisely what a Mongol victory looked like. The city did not fall. The walls held. The Mongol commanders faced a decision. They could persist in the campaign, besieging impenetrable fortresses, losing men and horses to constant raids, or they could cut their losses and withdraw. They chose to retreat. This was a logical choice, but also an admission of defeat. The withdrawal, especially Talabuga's northern route through the Carpathians, devolved into a nightmare. The very mountain passes that had funneled the Mongols into Hungary now became killing fields. Hungarian forces struck from ambush and vanished into the mountains. Winter storms caught armies stretched along the mountain roads. The meticulous discipline characteristic of their advance disintegrated into something approaching panic. The Verik Pass, the same pass Batu Khan had triumphantly used in 1241, became Talabuga's Valley of Death. Contemporary accounts describe how his army was torn apart by relentless attacks, with Hungarian forces annihilating stragglers and supply trains. The retreat morphed into a rout. The rout became a disaster. Nagai's retreat was better organized, but he too faced constant harassment and heavy casualties. King Ladislaus IV, who had avoided a decisive engagement with his main army during the invasion, now pursued the retreating Mongols, maximizing their losses. The entire invasion lasted about 2 months. 2 months compared to the year-long devastation of 1241. Some regions were raided, but the central lands remained untouched. No major city fell. The network of castles endured. The population was not annihilated. The Mongols were stopped. For the first time in their westward expansion, for the first time since they began conquering the world under Genghis Khan, the Mongols failed to achieve their objectives and were compelled to retreat without securing anything significant. The formidable military force that had carved out the largest contiguous empire in human history had just suffered a defeat at the hands of a kingdom they had nearly obliterated 44 years prior. The repercussions extended far beyond Hungary's borders. Within the Golden Horde itself, this setback triggered political turmoil. Talabuga laid the blame for the failure squarely on Nagai. In 1287, merely 2 years after the unsuccessful Hungarian campaign, Talabuga orchestrated a coup and seized power. His relationship with Nagai became openly hostile. The Golden Horde plunged into an internal conflict that debilitated it for many years. Less than 2 years after the fiasco in Hungary, the Mongols mounted another attempt, this time invading Poland in 1287. Once again, they met with failure, encountering the same obstacles. The Poles had learned the same lessons as the Hungarians. Hungarian detachments under the command of Georgi and Sovar even participated in Poland's defense, sharing their experience and expertise. Following this series of failures from 1285 to 1287, the Golden Horde never again initiated major incursions into Central Europe. Various raids and border skirmishes persisted for decades, but the dream of conquering Europe, of reaching the Atlantic Ocean, faded amidst the snows of the Carpathian Mountains and at the walls of Hungarian stone castles. By the 14th century, the situation had completely transformed. In 1345, a Hungarian army led by Count Andrássy invaded Golden Horde territory, decisively defeating Mongol forces in open battle and capturing the region that would later become Moldavia. The hunters had become the hunted. The victims had become victors. However, the story is not as triumphant as it might appear. Bela IV's solution to the Mongol threat gave rise to new problems that plagued Hungary for generations. Remember all those castles? By the 1280s, these fortified magnet strongholds had essentially evolved into independent principalities within their territories. They maintained their own armies, sometimes comparable in size to the royal forces. They possessed their own revenues, and they commanded fortresses capable of resisting royal authority indefinitely. The very system that saved Hungary from the Mongols was tearing the kingdom apart from within. The 1285 invasion shamefully exposed this predicament. King Ladislaus IV assembled a royal army, yes, but the actual fighting was conducted by local forces under the command of local warlords. Baron Roland Borsche routed Nogai's army.
Count Georg Bahar and his allies dispersed the invaders in the north. The Sekeles defended their territories. The king's contribution was minimal. The barons drew an obvious conclusion. They didn't need a king for protection. They could defend themselves. After Ladislaus IV's death in 1290 and the extinction of the Arpad dynasty in 1301, Hungary descended into 8 years of brutal civil war. Rival magnates and foreign claimants battled for the throne. The kingdom that had stood united against the Mongols fractured into warring factions. There's a lesson here, applicable far beyond medieval Hungary. Sometimes, solving our most pressing problems creates new, unforeseen challenges. Bela IV faced an existential threat and responded with radical transformations that saved his kingdom from annihilation. Yet, these transformations fundamentally altered the power structure, generating new instabilities. Was it worth it?
If Bela had not implemented his castle-building program, Hungary could have been destroyed in 1285 as thoroughly as it was devastated in 1241. So, yes, from the perspective of pure survival, the transformation was essential and unequivocally successful. But the Hungary that emerged was different, more militarized, more decentralized, more feudal. Power was more fragmented. Authority was more contested. Unity was more fragile. Now, I'm keen to hear your thoughts. What do you make of this compromise? Do you believe Bela IV made the right choice, even knowing it would eventually weaken royal power and contribute to future civil wars? Could there have been another path? Please share your opinions in the comments, as I genuinely want to hear diverse perspectives on this historical dilemma. Let's step back and analyze what transpired from a military and strategic standpoint, because the Hungarian victory in 1285 offers lessons relevant even in modern warfare. Firstly, there's the value of preparation and long-term strategic thinking. Bela IV didn't merely react to the Mongol invasion with short-term fixes. He anticipated the next invasion and systematically prepared for almost 3 decades. This demonstrates extraordinary strategic patience. Most leaders focus on the immediate crisis. Bela looked 40 years ahead and made decisions that would only bear fruit after his death. Secondly, there's the importance of learning from defeat. The 1241 invasion was a disaster, but it also served as a learning experience. The Hungarians discovered that light cavalry was ineffective against Mongol horse archers. They discovered that wooden fortifications were ineffective. They learned that attempting to consolidate their forces for one decisive battle was suicidal. Yet, they also uncovered what did work. Stone castles proved effective, as did crossbowmen fighting from defensive positions. Dispersed resistance functioned, and defense in depth was successful. The Hungarians didn't just rebuild what they had lost, they rebuilt intelligently. The Mongols, conversely, failed to learn or adapt. When they returned to Hungary in 1285, they employed virtually the same tactical approach, expecting similar outcomes. They became victims of their own success, believing that methods effective in China, Persia, and Rus would also succeed in Hungary. Thirdly, the power of defensive technology proved crucial. The Mongols had subjugated empires and defeated armies far superior to Hungary's, but they couldn't overcome well-designed stone walls defended by skilled troops. All their tactical brilliance, their mobility, and the advantages that had made them unstoppable became irrelevant when confronted with impregnable fortifications. The Mongols required their adversaries to engage in mobile warfare. Stone castles didn't comply. They simply stood firm, forcing the Mongols into time-consuming sieges, an unsuited endeavor to their strengths. This reveals a broader pattern seen throughout military history. Offensive military might often garner more attention and glory, but defensive technologies and strategies frequently determine outcomes. Think of castles in medieval Europe, trenches in World War I, or anti-tank defenses in World War II. The ability to deny an attacker an easy victory is often more vital than the capacity to attack effectively. Fourthly, the importance of an asymmetrical response became evident. The Hungarians did not attempt to defeat the Mongols in mobile warfare. They understood they couldn't achieve victory in mobile warfare against the world's most formidable mounted warriors. So, they didn't try. Instead, they built a defensive system that entirely neutralized the Mongol advantage. They compelled the Mongols to wage a different kind of war, one where Mongol strengths were irrelevant and Hungarian preparations paid off. This represents key strategic thinking applicable far beyond medieval conflicts. Too often, nations try to directly compete with adversaries in areas where the opponent holds a clear advantage. But sometimes, the intelligent move is to completely change the nature of the competition. Fifthly, the value of distributed resistance and layered defense. Hungary's defense in 1285 did not depend on the king or a single royal army. It relied on a network of local forces, each defending its own territory. Collectively, however, they created an environment where the Mongols couldn't operate effectively. If the Mongols destroyed one unit or captured one castle, it didn't lead to a total collapse. There was no single point of failure. Modern military analysts would recognize this as defense in depth. You don't try to stop the enemy on one line. You create multiple layers of resistance, forcing the enemy to fight for every objective, denying them the decisive victory they seek. Finally, the importance of morale and psychological factors played a significant role. The Hungarians of 1285 were not psychologically the same as those in 1241. By 1285, they knew precisely what the Mongols were capable of, but they also knew the Mongols could be stopped. They built an entire kingdom on this principle. They possessed confidence born of preparation. The Mongols approached the invasion with overconfidence, fueled by too many easy victories. They failed to show due respect for their adversary. This overconfidence led to strategic and tactical errors. I want to specifically highlight Bela IV, because I believe he is one of the most underrated figures in medieval history. His achievements deserve to stand alongside renowned statesmen like Alfred the Great or William the Conqueror. When Bela returned to Hungary in May 1242, he was already over 50, considered old for the medieval period. He had just witnessed the destruction of his kingdom in Hungary's most catastrophic military defeat. He had fled across Europe, losing family members and nobles, and had seen his life's work obliterated. He had every reason to simply focus on survival, recover what was lost, and hope for a peaceful end to his reign. Instead, he embarked on one of the most ambitious state-building projects in medieval European history. His castle-building program alone was monumental. 44 castles in 10 years, almost 100 by the end of his reign. This was more than just construction. It was a complete reorganization of Hungarian society and economy. Each fortress necessitated quarrying stone, transporting materials to elevated positions, employing skilled masons, and orchestrating thousands of laborers. This represented a substantial engineering undertaking, a logistical puzzle that would challenge even modern nations. Yet, Bela IV achieved it through sheer determination. However, his efforts went far beyond merely constructing fortifications. He meticulously reassembled the entire administrative framework, revamped the military, attracted thousands of settlers, spurred the growth of the mining sector, fostered urban development, reformed the currency, and engaged in diplomatic initiatives. He successfully upheld Hungary's standing as a significant Central European power. This individual truly merits recognition among history's great statesmen. What he accomplished in 28 years rivals the deeds of more celebrated figures who benefited from considerably more favorable circumstances. Nevertheless, because the history of Hungary doesn't receive the same educational focus in English-speaking curricula as Western European history, Bela IV remains largely obscure outside Hungary itself and Central Europe. This represents a noticeable oversight in our educational system. Frankly, I find it quite shameful. American students, who delve into the detailed histories of English monarchs whose achievements pale in comparison, should also be introduced to the Hungarian king who inherited a devastated realm and transformed it into a nation that halted the Mongol advance into Europe. Chroniclers even hailed him as the second founder of Hungary, equating his achievements with those of Saint Stephen I, who established the kingdom in 1000 AD. This comparison is entirely fitting.
In some ways, what Bela IV achieved was even more remarkable than the initial formation of the state, as he had to rebuild from ruins under constant threat. Upon Bela IV's death in 1270, he bequeathed a completely revitalized kingdom. The network of fortifications served Hungary for centuries. Towns blossomed into major urban hubs. Settlers contributed to development for generations. But perhaps most significantly, he left a legacy of resilience, demonstrating that a catastrophic defeat doesn't necessarily imply ultimate subjugation. He proved that strategic foresight and readiness can help surmount seemingly insurmountable challenges. This legacy is certainly worth remembering, as the lesson extends beyond medieval warfare. It speaks to human perseverance, the power of long-range planning, and the potential for transformation even after the greatest catastrophes. And so, as we near the conclusion of our narrative, I wish to bring things full circle by returning to that sentry on the walls in 1285, hearing the Mongol war cries echoing through the mountains, witnessing the Golden Horde's standards rising over the passes, observing the horizon darken with approaching horsemen. Yet, history did not repeat itself, because between 1241 and 1285, everything had shifted in ways the Mongols couldn't comprehend until it was too late. The Mongols arrived in Hungary, anticipating finding the same vulnerable kingdom they had decimated 44 years prior. They expected to encounter wooden palisades easily burned, open plains ideal for their cavalry maneuvers, and armies that would gather for decisive battles which they could win through superior mobility. Instead, they discovered a network of stone fortifications they couldn't breach, a dispersed defensive system they couldn't overcome with their mobility, and a populace that knew precisely how to oppose them and had been preparing for this moment for 4 decades. The 1285 invasion spanned 2 months and yielded no strategic benefits. Not a single major city fell to the Mongol assault. No decisive battles annihilated Hungarian military might. As they retreated, Hungarian forces harried them all the way to the border, turning the withdrawal into a protracted engagement that significantly depleted Talabuga's northern army. The catastrophe at the Arch Pass provided a fitting end to the triumph of Przemysl. The same location, the same mountain pass, but contrasting outcomes, separated by 44 years of profound transformation. In 1241, Batu Khan crossed the pass leading a victorious army. In 1286, Talabuga retreated through the identical pass with the remnants of a shattered army. For the Mongols, 1285 marked the beginning of the end of their westward expansion. They never again launched major incursions into Central Europe. The mystique of Mongol invincibility was shattered, broken against the walls of Hungary's castles. For Hungary, this vindicated Bela IV's foresight, but it also heralded new difficulties. An emboldened nobility spent the following decades tearing the country apart with civil wars. The Arpad dynasty ceased to exist in 1301, followed by 8 years of civil strife. This is characteristic of historical victories. They are never entirely clean. They always come with costs not immediately apparent at the moment of triumph. The Hungary that overcame the Mongols in 1285 was a distinctly different nation from the Hungary of 1240. It had become more militarized, more decentralized, and more fragmented. Yet its people endured to face these challenges. The population avoided annihilation in another genocidal conflict. The kingdom itself wasn't obliterated or erased from the map. Hungary's distinctive culture and identity remained intact. And when confronting the Mongolian Empire at the zenith of its power, mere survival counts as a triumph. The broader lesson here extends beyond the specific aspects of a 13th century war. It speaks to resilience and adaptation in the face of catastrophic menaces. The greatest disaster in Hungarian history served as a catalyst for a transformation that ultimately preserved the monarchy. And the survivors of 1241 could have succumbed to despair. They might have concluded that resistance was futile, that the Mongols were too formidable to be defeated. Instead, they meticulously analyzed the situation with unsparing honesty. They identified what worked and what didn't, systematically rectifying every weakness. Society underwent a complete reconstruction based on lessons forged in fire and blood. And when the time for testing arrived, these lessons culminated in total victory. This principle isn't confined to medieval warfare or military history. Whether confronting personal setbacks, organizational obstacles, or national emergencies, the pattern remains consistent. Defeat can be instructive if approached with integrity and thoroughness. Catastrophe can become the starting point for metamorphosis if one is prepared for fundamental changes and prolonged preparation. The key resides in possessing the foresight to know what actions are necessary, the resolve to execute them, even during arduous and costly periods, and the patience to adhere to strategies that may only bear fruit after a decade. King Bela IV possessed this vision, resolve, and patience.
The Hungarian nobles, busy constructing castles and training militias, demonstrated this dedication to a defensive strategy, requiring decades to materialize. The soldiers defending the walls in 1285 exhibited courage, born of training and confidence in their defensive system's effectiveness. And thanks to all of them, through their collective efforts spanning 2 generations, when the Mongols returned expecting an easy triumph, they instead received a harsh lesson that resonated through the ages. Some defeats remain just defeats, but others allow for a stronger resurgence than before. In 1241, Hungary experienced the sheer scale and terror of devastation. In 1285, they taught the Mongols a brutal lesson about determination, preparation, and what transpires when an entire society commits itself to resisting a specific threat. The seemingly unstoppable force finally met an immovable object. And for the first time in the Mongolian Empire's history since Genghis Khan united the tribes, it was the force that shattered. Consider this for a moment. The Mongols had conquered territories from Korea to Poland, from Siberia to the Persian Gulf. They had vanquished every major power they encountered. Chinese dynasties crumbled before them, Islamic caliphates collapsed, Russian principalities submitted. Yet here, in this relatively small Central European kingdom, they met their match. Not through superior cavalry or brilliant field tactics, but through something far more profound, the unwavering resolve of a people who refused to be victims twice. The legacy of 1285 extended far beyond Hungary's borders. Other European kingdoms took notice. They realized that the Mongols could be halted, that proper preparation and a defensive strategy could neutralize even the most formidable war machine. The lessons learned by Hungary permeated medieval Europe, influencing fortification design and military doctrine for generations. In the most direct sense, Bela IV's vision not only saved Hungary, it fundamentally altered Europe's approach to defense and readiness for future threats. And there's a deeply human element to this story that echoes through the centuries. It's not about advanced technology or overwhelming numerical superiority. It's about a community facing annihilation, miraculously surviving, and then making a conscious decision to transform itself so completely that when the threat returned, they were ready. It's about old men planting trees in whose shade they will never sit. It's about sacrifices made in the present for future security. It's about refusing to accept that the past dictates the future. If you've watched the video to this point, thank you for your interest in a deep dive into medieval military history and strategic transformation. This is precisely the kind of detailed historical analysis that doesn't always fit into typical school curricula. But I believe these stories are vital. They demonstrate what humans are capable of when they are willing to learn, adapt, and strive for long-term goals. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future content. We will delve further into these remarkable historical narratives, which truly merit wider recognition. Feel free to leave a comment below, sharing your insights or suggesting other historical subjects you'd like to see examined in such depth. Did Bela IV make the correct decision? Could an alternative path have been taken? What are your thoughts on the trade-offs between centralized authority and defensive capabilities? I meticulously review every comment and genuinely value your input. Please circulate this video to anyone who appreciates compelling historical accounts, enjoys detailed analytical breakdowns, and savors tales of endurance and strategic foresight. Share it with a historian friend who is perpetually seeking excellent illustrations of strategic evolution. Distribute it among students who might be studying medieval Europe and need to grasp that history is more than just dates and monarchs. Assist in disseminating these stories, which are seldom discussed in history classes but unequivocally deserve exploration. And bear in mind, the primary influence guiding historical events is not conquest, military superiority, nor the ability to obliterate adversaries.
The ultimate driving force in history stems from an unwillingness to remain vanquished, a firm resolve to rebound after defeat, and a readiness to learn from disaster to emerge stronger. This embodies an unspoken courage, creating something today whose value will only become apparent decades later. And it signifies the wisdom to recognize that genuine strength lies not solely in achieving victories, but also in developing systemic frameworks that ensure your children and grandchildren won't be compelled to fight the same battles as you. Hungary exemplified this in 1285. This lesson remains pertinent even now. When confronting personal challenges, professional setbacks, or striving to build something enduring, recall this identical principle. Learn from your failures, plan for the distant future, and never yield to the notion that defeat is absolute. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you in the next installment.